Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass, and this is It's All About Food. My guest today is Robert Grillo. Let me tell you a little bit about him. As an activist for all species, including the human ones, Robert Grillo has played the role of thought leader as well as frontline activist, leading campaigns, large-scale protests, and other creative actions since 2012. He has learned as much from academia as he has from the streets, from first-hand experience in grassroots activism. Most figures involved in social change are either academics on the theory side or activists on the practice side. Rarely do you find those who engage equally in both the theory and application, providing a unique perspective that bridges the gap between the two important sides of every moment. Robert Grillo is also the founder and director of Free From Harm, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing a plant-based food system and challenging the dominance of animal agriculture since 2009. He founded Slaughter Free Network in 2018 with the intent of building a powerful grassroots base and carrying out dramatic and innovative actions to capture the attention of media, public, and food industry power holders. And I just want to add that Robert Grillo is one of the nicest people on the planet. Our program today is titled Playing the Outside Game to Grow Our Movement. Thanks for joining me. Here's my interview with Robert Grillo. Robert Grillo, it is so good to see you and to talk with you once again.
It's been a while. It's long overdue.
I agree. And I'm so glad you're on the planet. I like to say, this is a difficult planet to live on. It's not that I enjoy saying it, I just say it often. This is a difficult planet to live on. And with all the challenges that we have, I'm glad that you're out there doing everything that you can.
Right.
To make things a little bit better.
That's what makes life worth living, I think, is that, the special people in your circle and your community, with all the stuff going on, that you have this group of people that you love and share time with. So that's what keeps us sane, I think.
That's what keeps us sane in this insane world. Yeah. And every week I say it. Lately I've been saying it all the time. This is an insane world. We live in insanity. Otherwise, all the horrible things that are happening wouldn't be happening if we weren't insane. And I like to think a few of us are not. And I also like to think that there's potential to bring sanity to the insane.
Right. Yeah.
But let's stay positive. Okay, Robert, you're awesome and you're doing all kinds of wonderful work. And that's what we want to talk about today, especially a recent event that you had. So I'm going to leave it to you to tell us what's been happening.
Thank you. Yeah. First, I just love, I wanted to ask you, are all those books behind you, are those all yours?
Yeah, so directly behind me, this section, now nobody can see because it's audio, there's about 300 vegan cookbooks there.
Wow.
And then next to it in the next section are opera and musical theater scores.
That's cool.
And I'd like to think that I've sung at least one piece in each of those books.
Really?
If not more. Yeah. Anyway.
Definitely.
And I've tried, I don't like to have stuff. Stuff gives me anxiety. And I'm hearing about friends of mine who have so much stuff and for one reason or another and have to figure out ways to downsize. And not too long ago, I gave away about 300 books. I do this podcast, publishers send me books, I read them. You end up collecting books. Now I tend to request PDFs because they don't take up room on my shelf. And I can search on PDFs. So I like them. I mean, I like the feel of books. I like reading books when I'm reading books for myself and no one else. But these books behind me that you see, it's going to be very difficult to part with any of them if I have to. So
yeah, because everything kind of has some kind of, it's tied to some special thing, experience or something, right?
Yeah. I mean, the music, I'm not done singing, so they're not going anywhere. And the cookbooks, I'm not done cooking, so they're not going anywhere.
Far from it.
Yeah. So that's the answer to my
So
question.
yeah, that's good. Well,
That's
it's good.
my that's my answer to your question, right?
Yeah.
And then before we get into the serious stuff, I see you've got some friends behind you. Do you want to talk about the green people behind you?
Yeah. I guess I've always had some house plants, like just kind of like everybody else probably has a couple here and there that they kind of half-heartedly take care of,
Exactly.
some die on us and some don't make it. But I guess I don't know if it was like during the pandemic, I guess maybe that I started, like a lot of people, getting more into plants, and I just found myself not buying a lot of plants, but just like propagating, experimenting with cuttings and people giving me stuff, and moving my mother out of her house, and
Mm.
all of a sudden finding that I have all of her plants. And it's like, and then this is what happens. But I'm not one of those consumers of plants that has to get like the latest philodendron, or something fashionable, or you know popular for collectors. I'm not like that. I don't care about variety so much as, I mean, I do love philodendrons, but I don't care so much about the species and how rare it is or anything like that. If it's beautiful and there's, it feels good to have it around, that's what's important to me.
And that's what's important to you overall, not just with plants, right? You don't discriminate.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm thinking how important plants are, especially when we live inside, and especially as the air is becoming more and more polluted. These plants are here to help us. So it's good to have a lot of green around you, creating oxygen for you to breathe, good oxygen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a definite perk, for indoor air quality, for sure.
Right. I have an air doctor, one of these HEPA filter things, which I haven't used yet. I'm waiting for the next burning disaster. But plants help too.
Yeah,
And
they
they're a
do.
lot less expensive.
They can, yeah, if you don't buy the collector stuff, they
Exactly.
are expensive.
And they do require a lot of care. And the last thing I want to add to that is I grew some things on the terrace this summer, just some herbs and things. And I invested in a very inexpensive timer irrigation system that really helped, because I don't think about taking care of them all the time. And I like to think they're out in the wild taking care of themselves, but they need to be watered. And that really helped.
Yeah, right. I have a morning routine where I go around and I make a cup of coffee and I go around and I look to see who needs some attention. And inevitably there's some that really need it. But every morning I kind of I do my tour and try to, you know, give a little love and attention before I start my day.
Okay, now let's start this podcast and get to the quote meat of things. I just want people to know Robert Grillo is one of the nicest people on the planet. Okay.
Well, that's very sweet of you to
Well,
say.
I only speak the truth. You were involved in an event recently, and I want to hear about that, and I want to hear about a lot of other things. But let's start with that. Can you tell
Yeah.
me about how it got started, what happened, and what's the conclusion?
So it all started in 2019. If we go back, if we provide the context for this whole Fairlife milk brand debacle. Actually, it's a good thing for our movement, because Animal Recovery Mission, as you probably saw with all the news coverage, did an investigation, and then they did a press conference in Chicago, which is where Fairlife's headquarters are. And Richard Cuoto, otherwise known as Kudo, did the press conference, speaks very eloquently. And his group did an investigation at one of the farm suppliers in Indiana for Fairlife. And, it was really impressive, the amount of media attention on this. I haven't seen anything like it for an investigation of this kind in a long time. And And then I think it was Richard who reached out to me and said, hey, are you guys thinking of doing protests? Do you have any interest in like, and I said, yeah, let's do it. So then other people got involved, other kind of leaders in our movement who do lots of good protest work got involved, people in LA and Atlanta, New York, Chicago. And we staged protests because so Fairlife is owned by Coca-Cola, and in 2019 it was half owned by Coca-Cola, and their headquarters are in Atlanta. So we had a group in Atlanta staging protests at their headquarters. Fairlife's headquarters are in Chicago. And New York and LA, I can't remember exactly what their angle was, but we all got involved, and it was great because we got a lot of media attention at our protests. And in fact, I had like mics pointed in my face from like all the major news networks. I was like, okay. And I felt like it was a good moment. Like we were able to speak about not just what the narrative we were able to debunk the Fairlife narrative that this was just a few bad apples, and that they just needed to correct things and things would go back to normal and be fine.
I just want to interject here and say that's the standard narrative of all giant animal agriculture businesses. When somebody finds out something bad they're doing, they all say, yeah, it's just a bad place here and we're taking care of it. We don't support that.
Absolutely. They distance themselves.
Yeah.
And even in the name itself, if you think about the name Fairlife, it's embedded in the culture of the industry. Their goal is to try to really make us believe that this is a good life for animals that they provide and that they care so much about them. Even these large corporate brands, especially them, maybe because they're the ones that do the most damage. So anyway, so this all went down in 2019. It was all very good for everyone involved. They got lots of media attention. We were very happy to see the public's attention on Fair. Everybody knows about the Fair. If you ask pretty much anybody I've asked, they know about the 2019 Fairlife investigation and all the media frenzy over it. Fast forward 4 years later, I got another call from Richard saying, we're going to release an investigation again. And I just wanted to make you aware of it. And then he did another press conference a few months ago in Chicago again, saying that they went back to the same farm 4 years later. And this was after a lot of stuff went down in 2019 as a result of their investigation. For one thing, the very powerful dairy family in Indiana, the McCloskey family, sold their 50% share to Coca-Cola. So now Fairlife is a wholly owned subsidiary of Coca-Cola at this point. The other things that happened is certain people were fired that were, charged with abuse. And Coca-Cola made all of these promises that things would be completely different, that the problem would be completely corrected. And there was a class action lawsuit against Coca-Cola that was moving ahead. And they were bound to certain, my understanding is that Coca-Cola and Fairlife were bound to certain rules not to violate their class action lawsuit, because the consequences for that are very, very serious in courts, apparently. I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I've kind of been told. So fast forward to 2023, Richard comes back and tells the press, hey, nothing's changed. In fact, things may have actually gotten much worse. One of the worst things we saw was because when a downer cow can't get up and she's in the middle of a warehouse where they need to be able to get through, how do they move this animal, this 1,000 or 1,500 pound animal that can't get up? Well, they have to use a bulldozer, but in this case, it was so vicious that they used a bulldozer at apparently 25 miles an hour to move this animal. So those are just some of the kind of things that they found. And in any case, the interesting thing that happened this time was that Coca-Cola completely denied that this farm that was investigated by ARM was actually one of their suppliers, because they said they cut ties with them after the first 2019 incident. But, and this is according to ARM, they have it on record from this farm's manager and from following the trucks to the Fairlife Distribution Center that, in fact, this farm supplies exclusively to Fairlife. So, but what happened was is it threw off the media, because Coca-Cola told the reporters, this isn't our farm. You can't publish this story. This is not our supplier. So no media coverage, very, very little at all.
Doing good media work anymore, mainstream media. Why do they just believe them and don't follow the trail?
Yeah, right. They were scared. They were spooked.
Wow.
I think they were probably spooked by Coca-Cola's attorneys, because they kind of put a chill on the story. So since then, we decided not to do the that we had planned at Fairlife because of all this. Because if the media wasn't going to show up, we thought, well, maybe this isn't the best time. We're not going to be able to leverage the buzz that the media could lend to this. So we held off and we waited and we looked for opportunities, and something came up in New York. And it was, I don't know how to describe this. CARE is an organization that claims to, fight world hunger. Has quite an endowment, apparently. Not sure how much, but millions and millions of dollars. And they had this big awards ceremony. They can do an awards. They can afford to do. Let's put it this way: they can afford to do an awards ceremony at the Siegfried Ballroom in Midtown.
Right. Nothing in Midtown is cheap.
Nothing in Midtown is cheap. And the starting price for tickets is $1,500 a person, which probably by New York standards isn't incredible. But in any case, we had found that Coca-Cola executives, including the CEO, James Quincy, were going to give themselves awards for being such great stewards of world poverty.
Wow.
And we just thought, oh, this is brilliant. Yeah, we need to be there. So long story short, we were there, and we had group of activists that got on stage and disrupted the narrative, basically changed the narrative. Instead of, oh, how wonderful Coca-Cola is and their top executives, we changed the station and turned it on the abuse at their Fairlife brand. And how terrible that is, not just for animals, but also for world hunger. Because if you're feeding cows instead of humans, you got a public relations problem. So that was our event, and it was really pulled off great, considering that Bill Clinton was there, along with his Secret Service staff, which made it a lot more difficult for activists to get in. But they managed to get through security checkpoints and Secret Service, and they were on stage for a while. And we got the attention of very powerful people in the audience that may not have known anything about Fairlife or the abuse of the dairy industry.
I have so many questions. So you said there was the Bill Clinton security there. What was the strategy? How did you get in?
So we had a person in the room that was ticketed and had a seat and was able to, first of all, the doors were open to the ballroom. The doors the way the ballroom's designed is you enter through the main doors, and to get to the stage is a very long stretch, but there's also side doors. So they were able to get into one of the side doors.
Very
and that
cool.
was closest to the stage. Also farthest from the doors that they would have to get them out from, because you have to use those doors all the way at the other end of the ballroom. to get them down the stairs and out of the building. So that's a really long stretch. And we thought, great, because that's more time that we get to be in the room.
I'm just thinking of crazy things I watch on Netflix, like Lupin. I don't know if you've seen Lupin, but he's kind of like a Robin Hood character, steals from the rich, and he's trying to take revenge on something that happened to his father a long time ago. It's based on a fictional character, but it's really fun.
Right.
You always see these big events and these big galas where he's going through the back staircases and he's got this whole thing planned out. But what were the risks that the activists took in being there? Could they have been arrested or anything like that?
Very unlikely. Usually in these cases where we're in a hotel at a conference or some kind of fancy banquet room, hotels and other places are technically, they are private property, but they're open to the public. And so in most cases, security will ask you to leave and you'll slowly move. You'll try to maximize your time. But they can't make arrests, of course. Police can what would typically happen is if the police did get there, which, New York police, I don't know. I don't know if they're anything like Chicago police, but they might take 15, 30, 45 minutes to show up, right? So by the time they get there, the are over. But if they do get there, the most likely scenario is they'll say, hey, these people have asked you to leave, and now we're asking you to leave. And if, you have a chance to leave now. If you don't, we can charge you with disorderly conduct.
Right. So you were able to get your complete message. How much time did you have to talk to the audience? And were they like respectful and listening to you, or it was noisy and chaotic?
The audience reaction was somewhat funny because it was towards the end of the night, but even still, it was not far. It was far from over. But when the action started, the audience started getting up and moving around and being kind of nervous. Like, it was a bit chaotic of a scene, and many people started leaving when that happened. But yeah, it was strange the way, it almost made us think that Coca-Cola knew or somehow got tipped off that maybe something like this happened. So they waited until the very end of the night to have their awards ceremony, which was supposed to start at 8:00. But there was still a full house, of people in the room.
Okay, so I assume there was some kind of media there. What was the reaction? Did you get any press? Did you get some feedback?
Not anything but the social media exposure that we generated and other groups helped us generate. We couldn't tip off the media in advance because we couldn't really confide in them. But even after the fact, our PR person wasn't able to get the media's attention. There was a little bit of miscommunication as far as the urgency of, like, this needs to kind of, and unfortunately it was it was a Thursday night. The press release didn't go out until later in Friday afternoon, which means they're not going to see it, which means then there's the weekend. And then by the time Monday comes, it's not a story anymore for them to consider. So the timing, unfortunately, with the press release didn't work too well. Otherwise, I think we could have gotten some media.
I'm remembering we went to a tennis match at the US Open this summer, and there were three climate activists that protested, and one of them glued their feet to the floor. And we had to wait 45 minutes before that activity had dissipated and they got the activists out of there. And, I believe we're doing horrible things to the climate. So I support activists. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know if this is, the best thing, and I don't know what they accomplished, but there was plenty of press there because it was a major match. So they did get articles in major newspapers. I read about it in the New York Times. They got some attention. Did it do anything? I don't know.
Right.
That's the problem. How do we get people to move? So I filled out petitions for care, plenty of them. They're really good at petitions, right?
Yeah.
Oh, how are they reacting, or is there something that we can do to get to them or get to Coca-Cola? The whole thing is quite obscene.
Yeah. So just to kind of respond to one of your earlier points first, no one particular action in itself is going to move the needle, but the collective activities are what should, bring about what we want is a trigger event. We want something that that really moves the needle, that galvanizes people, because it's like a George Floyd incident. It's a thing that just galvanizes a ton of people and who want to take action against a terrible injustice. And so I don't think as a movement have found that trigger event. Maybe we have on smaller scales, but nothing that has really gotten into the public's mind and said, wow, we really have to do something about this. So I'd say that I think every action, though, has a collective effect in the public's consciousness. And so if they were at a tennis game and they were subjected to this kind of situation, and then they went home and they heard something on the news about climate change. So all of these things collectively increase the people's consciousness. Acts of like this are never popular and aren't really intended to be popular, because it's more fundamental than that. It's about getting people to even think about the topic. And then once you get that kind of attention on it, then you have them maybe thinking more deeply about it. Then you can start, a different dialogue. But it's necessary to get people's attention on it. And that's what these kind of we call them outside game actions. We're not playing the inside game. We're not playing by the rules of the system because we think the system is too corrupt and it won't change meaningfully by playing by their rules, which are actually set up to have us fail, because we're not the power holders. They are, and they don't want to give up that power to change things. So we have to do outside game and inside game maneuvers to change the system.
What's especially disturbing is there are numerous nonprofit organizations that have a mission that many people can support, and it has to do with doing good on the planet. Now, we have our animal related nonprofits, we have our environment related nonprofits, and people and nonprofits that are working against food insecurity. There are numerous ones. And unfortunately, we see this pattern where the ones that get more successful and start to get more donors get corrupted by the money that they're receiving. So they do a certain amount of good, but they can't entirely tell the whole truth because they're getting donors now that are doing things that are wrong, and they can't speak out against those donors. And we have people like Kip Anderson and Keegan Kuhn who have done some documentaries like Cowspiracy and What the Health and Seaspiracy, and they have a new one. Well, Kip has a new one called Christspiracy coming out. And they often show these, well, at least in Cowspiracy, I remember, they showed these nonprofits, the ones that we believe are doing good, and how they're hypocrites because they have donors that are doing terrible things and they cannot tell the whole truth because of that. And CARE is an organization, right, that we all think they're doing good things, and yet they're awarding people that are doing bad things. And I think that's just human nature, unfortunately. I want to believe, Robert, that if you became very, very wealthy and your organizations became very popular, you'd still stay committed to the path and that it couldn't corrupt you.
Well, that raises a great point, which is that, money doesn't buy change. Money doesn't make change. People-led grassroots movements make change. They are the catalyst for change. And they don't take a lot of money. They take volunteerism. They take people that are disenfranchised who are very upset with the current state of things and are willing to invest their time and energy. And the great leaders of the different great movements that we've seen, past and present, are people that know how to galvanize public support, create this moral crisis that gets people to want to act, to join the movement on some level. Now, these large nonprofits, I think we can look at this as on a more general level, that special interests, like you suggested, special interests corrupt best intentions, whether it's nonprofit executives, whether it's public officials, whether it's leading investors. I don't care who it is, but it's most paradoxical and disturbing, I guess, when it's nonprofits, because you expect that they have a certain mission and they're not going to allow these special interests to dictate to them how they're going to carry out their work. So it's a struggle for movements, all movements that have both sides of this. They have a grassroots side that is about people power and leveraging people power from the outside to put pressure on the power holders of the system. And on the other side, the moderate reformist side of the movement that says, well, it's an imperfect system, but we think we can work within the rules to really make some kind of meaningful change. The problem with that side for me is they're using, where is all this money going? I don't understand it, because like there are funding sources like the Open Philanthropy Project, which has, just for animal welfare causes, already distributed $90 million. Where is that money going?
Right.
Did it go to pay for lobbyists and lawyers and campaign donations for politicians so that we could get Prop 2 passed in California? Where does this millions of dollars go? Because grassroots movements can change things without requiring that kind of money. The other interesting thing in this context, I want to point out is that the Gallup poll now has come through again saying that lower income people are twice as likely to be vegetarian, which says that they're probably twice as likely to be sympathetic to our cause and want to join our movement. So why aren't we appealing to those everyday working people instead of these big, money people? Because if money was really the catalyst for change, we would have seen animal liberation. There's been $90 million injected into this movement. Yeah. What has it done? That's my question.
It's a good question. I support the grassroots, and I agree with you, and I'm so glad that you brought all of this up, that's where the change is made, and that money doesn't make change. But I just want to point out just two little things I noticed recently in my environment here to show that people are getting the message. Change won't happen as fast as we want, but I ride the subway, and Organic Valley, that makes dairy products organic, they have a big campaign. They have all these panels in the subway saying how sustainable, and they use very vague language. And of course, they show the images of the cartoon green prairies with animals grazing happily. And they want to give you this impression that they're a wonderful company. they're doing it because the message is getting out that they're not. And even if dairy is organic, they're still cruel and exploitive to animals and probably people too. That was one thing. Then another thing was I was scrolling on Facebook or somewhere and I saw an advertisement for Land's End and some kind of coat with, I forgot the adjective they used, but for down, but it made it sound like maybe it wasn't real down or something. So I clicked and I was researching and reading, and they had all these vague terms, how they didn't believe in the barbaric practice of obtaining down, and they work with allied down. And I went to see allied down, and they have more vague terms about their procedures. And it's all bullshit. And they're still exploiting animals. But they're starting to see a need to address the concerns that people are having. So I take that as a good sign, even though it's sad.
I agree. I would call that damage control because they feel like they have to.
Yeah.
Fairlife is to go back to the Fairlife example, is a perfect example. If you look at their promotional content now, their videos and their website and marketing stuff, the emphasis on animal welfare and husbandry, and the concern for animals is repeatedly in the messaging. It's more so now than ever because it's part of the damage control that they feel that they think they have to do. But in Fairlife's case, sadly, if sales are any indication of success, Mark, so they are a successful milk brand, and they're building a $650 million plant in near Rochester, New York. And not only that, the state of New York is giving them a $67 million credit. The levels of wrong here, they're succeeding. In other words, is what I'm saying. And that's a different matter from saying, the public feels like concerned. So they have to do all this marketing to do the damage control. So that's a good sign. I agree. But at the same time, I see the industry succeeding in other ways. And we're not focusing on the power holders enough. That to me is the big problem. We're focusing on the end users, which is they're not the powerful people. These people that are making these brands successful, we're letting them off the hook. We're not holding them accountable. And until we start doing this in a collective, consistent way, orchestrated way, we're not going to see a huge change. I think that's my belief.
I don't know if you have the answer to this, but you mentioned earlier that there was a class action suit against Coca-Cola for doing these egregious things with their suppliers, or that they were in violation of many things. Mm-hmm. And that if they violated some of the agreements in the class action, there would be major penalties. So you implied that they did violate what they weren't supposed to. And is anyone going after them? Is there
I believe so. Right. Yeah. And the information I have is just what I've seen from ARM in terms of like a class action lawsuit.
And ARM stands for
Animal Recovery Mission.
Thank you.
So their website and just sources like, their Facebook posts and stuff, but all public information. As far as like whether or not I don't know the specifics of like what they'll do in response to this new investigation, but I believe that, the litigation is going to be ongoing. The thing about litigation is it's an inside game move and it takes years and a lot of money, right? So what can we do in the meantime as everyday working people? Can we afford to hire attorneys? Can we afford to be in part of that litigation proceeding? No, but there's a lot of other things that we can do to put pressure to support that legal effort. And that's where we come in.
So what can we do?
We can disrupt a Coca-Cola Gala Award. We can get in front of these key decision makers at Fairlife and Coca-Cola and demand changes and embarrass them in front of their peers and say, until you make these changes, you'll have to deal with us. We're not going away, and you can't ignore us. You can ignore our hundreds of emails from our supporters, you can ignore our phone calls, but you can't ignore us at your events and in
Are you
public.
saying that if we write or send emails or make phone calls, that doesn't hold a lot of weight, or we should be doing everything?
Well, we should be doing everything, and there's an escalation strategy, right? So like we start out with diplomacy, and we start out with efforts to have a closed door meeting with these powerful people, but they're not going to grant it to us.
Mm-hmm.
We can ask supporters to contact them. And sure, that might make a somewhat of an impact. It might make them aware that, oh, there's a campaign, there's a coordinated effort to try to get us to make this change. And that might be helpful. But my belief is ultimately what changes things is when we impose a cost on the powerful institution or person. It's either a reputational cost or an economic cost, or ideally both. Because if we can hit them on both, it gives them even more of an incentive to meet the demand that we're looking for.
I think the economic cost is the biggest thing, and reputational cost is what affects economic costs, right? It's money.
And you just pointed out how much they spend on trying to do damage control.
Yeah.
Right. So that's to try to preserve and protect their reputation and the public's trust.
It's not easy, and it's difficult, and it's frustrating, and anything we can do, and people like to drink their sodas, and the Coca-Cola company, even if it's not about exploiting animals, they're exploiting people left and right. I mean, there've been so many stories about how they go in and they take the water source from an area that needs water, and they use it to make their beverages and add with added value.
Right. It's a terrible company.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible company.
So if you like Coke and Diet Coke, please stop drinking them. Stop supporting this company. Yeah. Robert, what else are you doing? Tell us about your organizations and
sure.
And what we can do.
So we're focusing on kind of the stuff that I was just telling you about, like finding ways, creative, bold actions, ways of getting in front of powerful people in our food system as a path to changing the food system. And the logic of that is that because many of these decisions about what food is going to be available to whom, at what cost, how accessible will it be, all of those kinds of decisions are not made by consumers. They are made by executives in closed door meetings with no public input whatsoever. So we believe that the change has to come from them or from government officials who support them, that we put pressure on and say, you can't have these corrupt ties with these people. And if you continue to do it, we're going to expose it. It's going to become a public relations debacle for you. So that's the pressure point that we're focusing on, where a lot of our movement is focusing on consumers. We're focusing on trying to change dominant institutions. And what we're doing to assist that is monthly workshops that create grassroots leaders, in short. They give them the skills, the support, the community that they need to go out into the world and really inspire more people to join our movement, because they're doing bold actions, because they speak well, they have wonderful stories to tell, and they're charismatic, and they know how to get public attention. There's a science to this that we can leverage, that it's a science, but it's also just general skills, a different set of skills that our movement isn't really training people in. Our movement is so professionalized. All it has to offer is professional advocacy skills, how to be a veterinarian, how to be an attorney, how to be a nutritionist, which are all important things to have in society. But a grassroots movement is different, and it requires a completely different set of skills. And everyday people can take these roles on. They can become leaders, and that's the beauty of it.
So you have these monthly events, they're live, but they're also streamed. So anyone, anywhere can take advantage of them?
Yeah, we do Zoom them. and we also do live events. So
Okay. And we can find out about these where?
Well, we have a mailing list. Go to slaughterfreenetwork.org and sign up, and you'll receive notices of how to register and when the meetings and other events take place.
Slaughterfreenetwork.org. Okay, we'll include that link on this podcast. I just want to talk about donations and charitable giving for a moment, because the end of the year is coming and there's a big push by many nonprofit organizations as well as for-profit organizations that are looking for funding. And Thanksgiving, we have Giving Tuesday, and then we have the big winter holidays coming up, and this is the time when people realize, oh, I have to do my charitable giving because it's a good thing, but also I want my tax write-off, right? And then we have the organizations that rate charitable organizations to tell you if they're legit or if they're effective in doing their work. And I can't say that I have total trust in the algorithms that they use to judge organizations. And if you're an organization that brings in a lot of money and you have a big staff, you can craft your narrative, you can craft your financials so that you look very positive in the organizations for the companies that are rating you so that you get a good rating, right? And then, as we mentioned before, money doesn't really make change. It's the grassroots that make change. So I want to qualify that money doesn't make change statement. Your money, in my opinion, can be more effective by supporting the small grassroots, hardworking organizations that are so desperately in need of so many things to get the work done. And they're far more efficient in their work. So I'm promoting you, Robert Grillo, and the work that you're doing. And, I'm going to do a self-promotion here for the work that we do at Responsibility in Living in this podcast. It's all about food. We tend to like to promote people that are doing the work that we really believe in. And that's that. You want to add to that, Robert?
I'd love to make a few quick points. One thing that comes to mind is a report that came out recently called Dollar and Dissent, which basically showed that only 3% of all donations go to grassroots movements in human rights or animal rights or any social welfare. The 97% goes to professional advocacy organizations that are already raking in millions. And the same is true in our movement as others. And so here's the thing about I'll say something about these charitable rating institutions. They are guided by an effective altruism approach. Effective altruism readily admits as one of their core tenets that they only seek to evaluate charities and other efforts on variables that are easy for them to measure. Okay, so cultural and social forces and how the grassroots is the impetus for moving those forces in the direction of justice, whether for animals or other human populations, is not something easy to measure. Therefore, the effective altruist approach does not take into consideration the complex social and cultural forces that really are the catalyst for change. They only look at the economic outcomes, for example, and these are valuable because, let's say if they could find that, let's say if we could find that Fairlife actually lost $200 million after making $1 billion, and it had something to do, or it could have been correlated with all this negative, the litigations, the activism, the lawsuits, all that. Then we could say, hey, it looks like the movement's having an impact on this industry in this particular case. But I'm not seeing these charity evaluator organizations looking at things like that. for instance, the Better Chicken Commitment, which is supposed to be a program that prevents the worst abuses to chickens in the chicken industry, there's no oversight. So the effective altruists say it's all about evidence and the number of chickens that you can get covered into this program. But there's no oversight. They're just taking the producer's word for it. And then they're taking the nonprofits that are participating in this program, taking their word for it by saying, oh yeah, we got KFC and Purdue Farms, and they're committing 12 million chickens. So they get paid based on the fact that they can claim, yes, we got 12 million chickens covered. And effective altruists, this program that's the only evidence they feel is necessary, and they pay out accordingly. So by their very own standards, solid evidence, they fail on that. And by ignoring the all-important social and cultural forces of change, they fail to look at one of the most important things about social movements and social change. Sorry, I know that was a bit long, more than we wanted to hear.
It's so important. I just want to say Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
Here's an example of effective altruism. And this guy is probably going to prison for a long time because of the fraud that he has allegedly committed, right? You don't want to go along the lines of effective altruism. I think people want to put their energies towards doing good. That should be the focus. This idea of making tons of money doing something so that you can give to an organization that's doing good things, it doesn't work, and it's not the best use of energy.
No, I agree. And it's not to say that we shouldn't try to measure our progress and that we shouldn't strive, but it's very difficult to measure how culture and social forces are going to change things. For example, like when Bernie Sanders ran in the primary against Hillary Clinton, none of those polls predicted that Bernie Sanders was going to win in 20 to 20 states, the primary. That was a big upset. There are big upsets and things that happen. There's George Floyd incidents, things that happen that change society, that are unpredictable. And we're not giving credit to those efforts when we look at just the economic results of something and say, that's because of these better welfare standards and these organizations here. No, I mean, we're not looking at the big picture when we evaluate charities and we don't see these big trigger events. It's a sad state of affairs.
It's sad, and I'm laughing because I can't do anything else. I want to add that I think a lot of people are feeling the darkness of our society and our world. Not that the world is any more darker than it's been in human history, because we've been a violent species since the beginning. But I think we know more about things that are going on because of social media and access to news. And the things that are being reported are the darkest kinds of stories. You don't hear about Robert Grillo and his group protesting at a care gala and telling the truth about Fairlife. You just don't hear those stories, and you don't hear really lovely, positive stories about people doing wonderfully good things. So we're all inundated with all of this darkness. And I keep bringing back to the work that we do, Robert, and that is not only trying to expose what's going on, but also how do we live our own lives, and how do we get the violence out of our own lives, and how do we not support the violence that's going on around us? And to me, that comes back to the food that we eat, what's on our plate, the clothes that we wear. Let's get the violence out of our own lives. And that empowers us to a certain extent, because a lot of people feel so hopeless. Oh, there's nothing I can do, so I'm just going to go on vacation. I'm just going to have a good time. I'm just going to go out to eat. But the things that we do and the money that we spend and the integrity that we have, I believe, makes a statement and makes a difference.
Yeah, especially when we're kind of presenting ourselves to the public. And, you're a public figure. You have more than one podcast. You're a public figure and you perform, as an actress. And that is especially true for people that are more public figures because they're kind of role models in a way, whether they believe it or not for themselves, they are to other people, and the other people look at them as and judge and how are they contributing to the public good or not. And we all make mistakes, we're all going to mess up, but we have a special responsibility to really conduct ourselves in a certain way. So if we do a disruption, if we do something that's disruptive or confrontational or creating a moral crisis, so to speak, like, Martin Luther King, Jr. liked to say, we do it in a dignified and nonviolent way. Because when we cross that boundary into violence is when we start losing, that erodes our standing and perception by the public. So it's a careful, fine line.
The last question I have for you, because we're almost at the end of the hour, is do you have any more secret protests coming up?
Oh,
Obviously you can't talk about them if they're secret. But...
yeah, that's a tricky question there, Karen. I think you're just trying to trip me up.
Always looking for an opportunity, right?
Always. Yeah, always looking for opportunities. And some of them know that we're looking for those opportunities.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And they try to go to great lengths to
shut you down,
prevent people from just how Trump, good example is Trump. He'll pack a stadium or a room with supporters who will do whatever he asks them to do to show just how wonderful they are.
Right.
Unfortunately, Trump is not unique in this way. This is how public relations is created in the corporate world.
Yeah, he's just maximizing it.
Yeah, fill the room with people that adore the CEO of Coca-Cola for whatever reason. Maybe they're paid
or
to do
pay people to do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, dear. Robert, I want to wish you a wonderful Thanksgiving and all the holidays that are coming at the end of the year. I know that you are a great activist in that you do great work, but you also take time to rejuvenate and make sure that you take care of yourself. And that's such an important thing. So I respect that. And I just wish you all good.
Oh, likewise. And I also care for my plants. Don't forget.
Right.
I mean, and I have 12 people coming for Thanksgiving.
Oh, my goodness.
It's going to be a potluck, bringing stuff. So it's going to be a fun Thanksgiving with a big group.
Robert, so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me on It's All About Food.
Thank you, Karen. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And that's another episode of It's All About Food. I sincerely appreciate you being there and listening. And for those of you who are making your choices about who you might want to support, whether it be Giving Tuesday or any day of the week, any time of the year, I hope you consider grassroots organizations doing so much with so little. And that includes Robert Grillo's Free From Harm, as well as our organization, Responsible Eating and Living, that produces this podcast. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving and have a delicious week.